So in light of events of Chapter 113, I think we might be getting a glimpse of what the final battle of One Punch Man might be. And of course I'm talking about the character that we were just introduced to in God. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about his possible fight with Saitama at the end of the series, but in order for me to get really into that, I'm going to have to go into webcomic spoilers, so if you don't want to know what's going to happen, I suggest you check it out now. So in my recent video, Why Saitama Will Fight Blast, I talked about how one is possibly using allegories as opponents and feats of power for Saitama. And of course I was equating Blast to Superman, but I think the next level after that is just going to be God, like, can Saitama defeat God? And not necessarily the God, I'm not talking about any religious stuff here. More of the idea of him, like the overall omnipotent being or just the creator or whatever you signify God being. And I think that one might be introducing this element to the story with a character literally by the name of God. So aside from him just having that crazy name and denoting that he's likely the most powerful character in the series, at least I'm just taking a guess, of course, I feel that he's been set up since the very beginning. So if we go back to what Homeless Emperor talked about with his origin and how, he was fired and he started hating humanity for what they had done to Earth and yada yada yada, God eventually discovered him after he showed his willingness to take himself out, made him his disciple because he shared the sentiment that humans are more or less like a cancer to the world and that they need to be taken out. So this means that God has some kind of connection to the world. Maybe he is the consciousness of the earth or something like that. But again, this takes us back to the beginning of the series with the very first monster/villain we were introduced to with Vaccine Man, who of course shared the same sentiments as Homeless Emperor and God, and even has the same kind of abilities that Homeless Emperor had with the light spheres and whatnot. And it's very interesting that Vaccine Man says that the will of the earth gave birth to me because of what humans are doing to the environment and the earth and all that stuff. So I think what he's talking about here, the will of the earth, is likely the being God that we have been introduced to. I don't know how he made Vaccine Man, your guess is as good as mine, but he very likely made him, gave him the powers, and was like, hey, just go out and start wrecking stuff, see how far you could go. And I think this might be setting up God from the very beginning, not only because of that and the connections and everything, but because of a peculiar statement that one made in an interview where he was asked whether there will come a day when Saitama gets defeated or not. And he said, well, he doesn't really give a direct answer to it, but he says he planned out how to end the series right at the beginning. And what he's currently doing is filling in the middle, and that he thinks he'll be able to produce a pretty interesting conclusion. So I think that right there might be evidence. Not saying it's concrete or anything, but it's certainly showing us that he already has in mind of what the overall story is going to be and how it is going to end. And since he says straight from the beginning, and if we go back to the beginning with Vaccine Man being introduced at that time, it's very likely that he always had the idea for this God character and had the intention of Saitama fighting him at the very end. And just based off of what we've seen of God, it seems like he's more than worthy of a final opponent for Saitama because he represents what could possibly be like a fourth dimensional type being. Something like that. He's definitely not typical of what we have seen so far. Like, we've seen super powerful villains like Boros and Awakened Garo, but they don't really have the kind of, ethereal type abilities that God has. I mean, not only can he just make regular humans into dragon-level threats with the crazy light sphere abilities that he could grant them, but he can also seemingly transport them or their consciousness to some kind of, outside dimension or something like that. Because we saw what eventually happened in the ending of his confrontation with Homeless Emperor. He actually wanted to silence Homeless Emperor in that whole sequence because of him spilling the beans to Zombie Man and whatnot. So it's very possible that God has extra dimensional abilities and crazy stuff like that, which, like I said, is not typical of the monsters we have seen or just the villains in general in One Punch Man. And we also have yet to see Saitama have to deal with something like this set of powers or a dynamic of this sort. So we're really unsure of how he would be able to deal with that, because we know he could punch away all of the threats and all of the powers, but can he punch away something that is almost beyond reality, like going in between dimensions or realities or stuff, and I'm sure that he can. So let me get into what I think this fight is going to be like. So, being the final opponent, of course, in theory for Saitama, that means he's going to push Saitama the furthest that he's ever been pushed, using the insane abilities that he has, which I'm assuming one of them is at least producing the light sphere ability that Homeless Emperor has, but like to the nth degree, of course. So he'll be having to deal with that, and then he'll have to be dealing with any other crazy space and time-bending effects and abilities that he could do. But I don't think that God is going to defeat Saitama. I don't think Saitama will ever be defeated. I mean, I know in what I was talking about with that question that one was asked, he doesn't give a direct answer because obviously he's not trying to spoil what is going to happen in the end of the story. But I also do know that one is just telling a shonen story, a battle manga, more or less in reverse. As to where at the end, the character has, the highest attainable level of power, and then he's going, riding off into the sunset and whatnot. As where this story is beginning with Saitama being at his peak power, and he's kind of just going along for the ride until then. But instead of just fighting, and gaining more power and fighting more powerful opponents, it just gets to the point of where he eventually just has to try more and more until he regains that feeling that he's always been looking for. Like, because a big narrative of the story is him losing his emotions and any kind of pleasures that he has in life. And we saw that even in that dream with the Subterraneans. He was super excited. He was like in a euphoric state because of how far that the Subterraneans were pushing him and whatnot. But he has yet to have that in reality again, ever since he broke his limiter and whatnot. So I assume that his fight with God will possibly give him that feeling, that rush that he's been chasing after, and possibly give him a new outlook on life. Like, maybe after his fight with God, or maybe even during it, he realizes like, oh, this is it. I've got it. Now I could just chill, or I could just go do like what Blast is doing. Like, he just sits back. He doesn't really need to be in the field anymore. He'll come out and save humanity when it's absolutely needed, but he doesn't really feel that he needs to be a hero anymore. He doesn't feel that he needs to get stronger or keep training. He just be content with who he is as a person. But aside from all that, I also think him fighting God gives him the ability to go all out, because if Saitama were to fight at his full strength on Earth, it would likely be destroyed very quickly. I mean, we just saw what one serious punch did. It blew away, an earth-busting attack and split the atmosphere. So if he was just throwing a whole bunch of serious punches and moving at his max speed and just overall fighting a being that could withstand that stuff, I mean, in theory, it would just wreck the Earth very quickly, like I said. So him potentially going to this extra dimension or this alternate reality or whatever the place that God took Homeless Emperor to, we could assume that he can replicate this with almost anyone. Him fighting him in that place would eliminate the possibility of him destroying Earth. And as for just other plot lines of this final battle that would take place in One Punch Man, you could already see the other possibilities for what the other characters would have to deal with, because we saw, in theory, that God made Vaccine Man, but he also made Homeless Emperor, and I'm assuming that that's not the absolute limit of his power and what he can bestow upon people. So you can just imagine, like, he can make, like, an army of, like, more powerful beings than Vaccine Man, and then that's what the heroes and the other characters would have to compete against while Saitama is taking on God, the source of all of this power and whatnot. I think that would be pretty interesting. So there's two more things I just want to touch on, and first being the statement that Dr. Genus made about the limiter when he's explaining it to Zombie Man. He says that God put a limit on the growth of all beings and whatnot. Well, this isn't really him talking about God. He's just kind of using a metaphor here, God being like nature and evolution and all of that stuff. He's not talking about this character God. Dr. Genus doesn't know that character. The character hadn't been introduced into the story at this point, and it just wouldn't make sense. That's not the dynamic that God has. There's no reason why he would put or remove a limiter on Saitama, considering he hates humans and he wants them to get rid of them. If he was trying to put an ability on Saitama, it would be the ability that he gave to Homeless Emperor. Also, he's never communicated with him. This is just, like, you don't have to literally look at what Dr. Genus is saying in this specific dialogue. He's not talking about this being. The second thing is the God versus Saitama fan comic made by the artist Siminglap. And that's just what it is. It's a fan comic. It's a fan manga, whatever you want to call it. It's not canon. It's not even remotely close to canon. And I know a lot of people think that it is, and that's because of, you know, the YouTubers and content creators who have uploaded various motion mangas of this, and, you know, everything that they've gone, the lengths that they've gone to make it seem like it's official, just to get more views and clicks on the videos. So it leads people to believe that, oh, this is the ending of One Punch Man, because they'll throw like a chapter 201, God versus Saitama. But yeah, it's just a fan manga. Siminglap himself, of course, is not like a perpetrator of this. He doesn't try to push it as being official or anything. It's just the content creators more so trying to be deceptive and whatnot. The only instances of God in the official story are what we have seen of him with Homeless Emperor. That's it. There's no other instance of him existing in the story, him appearing. He has yet to fight anyone. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. Let me know what you think about the final fight of One Punch Man. Do you think it's going to be Saitama versus God, and how do you think it's going to play out? But, you know, let me know. And if you like the video, please give it a like. I also have a Patreon. It gives you access to a weekly Q&A video. And if you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.